It's a very special privilege to have Maud and Pierre here. Some of you remember Pierre, who was teaching as a visiting distinguished scholar a couple of years ago. And as I recall my version of the story, on a Friday, he was teaching Adelphi freshmen and seniors. And on Monday, he was in Cote d'Ivoire, the head of a 10,000-man army. Now, that was truncated a little bit, but it's true on both ends. He, Ambassador Schori, is a scholar, author, foundation executive. He's been elected member of the Swedish Parliament, a government minister, a diplomat in Sweden, in the European Union and the United Nations, and served as special representative of the Secretary General in Cote d'Ivoire. His accomplishments are so numerous and impressive that the fact that he is such a down-to-earth person can take some people by surprise. In fact, a couple of years ago, my wife and I were visiting with the Schoris in Sweden, and they took us on a trip out into the rural parts of Sweden, and two incidents exemplify his impact. First, by cell phone, he called an inn, which he told us would be interesting and wanted to see if they had room for us. And the person who answered the phone asked, "Are you Mr. Schori?" Just by hearing his voice, which he had heard so often on the radio. A couple of days later, we were on a path to go to an art studio, a beautiful glassmaker, such workmanship I'd never seen. And walking on the path, there was an elderly gentleman sitting on a bench who looked up and said, "Ambassador Schori," because he'd seen his pictures in the paper. That's our Pierre. Welcome, Ambassador Schori.
Thank you very much. Being a minister has its problems. When I came here as a minister, government minister of asylum questions, actually, and I visited the immigration authorities in New York, in Manhattan, and it's a huge building, and we came to the wrong door, the wrong entrance, so we asked the guard there where the authority was, and who are you? He said, well, and then my assistant said, he's the minister of Swedish government. Which religion? Well, thank you to you all, to President Scott, who has given me an introduction like nobody else can do, to Professor Axelrod, to Katie, to the international initiatives, to the Veteran of Global Scholars, Political Science, and all the other of the Adelphi team for inviting me back again to campus after so many years. Great to be here. Great to see many of my colleagues here, former colleagues here. Yeah. When I left Adelphi in 2005, it was a vibrant intellectual and social community, strong also in arts and sports, as we can see now even more, and with ambitious plans for the future. And today, we can all see the impressive fruits of the Noble Goals Charter, both among staff and students and on campus and in the community surrounding Adelphi. Indeed. I left Adelphi for Africa, yes, on the call from Kofi Annan, then Secretary General of the UN. And I learned much about today's theme, women and war. And some of the lessons and experiences from those 2 years I want to share with you. It is true that I had about 10,000 police and military under my command, and I felt almost like President Scott, who has not the same number of people here on campus. So I learned a little bit, I trained a little bit here for that. I would like to quote to you my final words, my final paragraph of the so-called end of assignment report, which you write as a special representative of the Secretary General, that is head of the Peacekeeping Mission, SRSG is abbreviated, where I summed up my 2 years. I said, it wrote like this. Being an SRSG has been the most demanding and exciting, revolting and rewarding experience of my professional life. demanding for me as a newcomer to a large field mission under considerable internal and external pressure, exciting with the daily adrenaline shots, which both energized me and sometimes kept me sleepless. Revolting in seeing the gap between the misery and the powerlessness of the poverty-stricken majority and the glaring riches and arrogance of the ruling classes. And finally rewarding for having had the opportunity to work with committed and dedicated colleagues, and by common efforts, seeing misery reduced, international solidarity mobilized, and hope again glimmer in the eyes of the people. So these were the impressions I got after 2 years working in Africa, where I had, of course, not been able to do without the presence of my wife, who worked as a volunteer first, a UN volunteer at UNDP. Let me give you a short background to today's theme: women in war, victims or peacemakers? The background is, of course, the new and huge challenges for the United Nations peacekeeping, and then focus on the role of women in war and conflict. The challenges for the World Organization are illustrated by the 4 quotes you see in the handout, which I left on the table there. And the first one says, it's by the head of the Peacekeeping Operations Department in the UN now, the French Alain Leroy, who said the following: "We manage 18 operations deployed across 12 time zones in 5 continents, comprising 140,000 authorized personnel, of which 110,000 are currently deployed, directly impacting the lives of hundreds of millions of people. And this 140,000, 120,000 compares to 30,000 deployed personnel 10 years ago. So you understand the tremendous increase in peacekeepers over the last few years. That's one challenge. And I would say that the approved budget for these peacekeepers is about $7 billion, which is a lot, an all-time high, both in budget and personnel. But of course, if you stand back a little bit and look how many people the United States have in Iraq, for instance, or now in Afghanistan, and the enormous sum there, so it's nothing, it's a drop in the ocean what the UN peacekeepers are accounting for. But today, the UN peacekeeping is overstretched, under-budgeted, and still in greater demand than ever. And there is no sign, which is the second quote on this handout, there is no sign that the need for peacekeeping will diminish. Threats such as environmental changes, economic shocks, transnational crime and extremism threaten many states and contribute to growing political and security instability. And I read in a report from Washington recently where they say that the threat is lies no longer in the strength of our enemies, but in its weaknesses. I mean, in the form of failing states and so on. And I think that is another of the complexities of seeing what is the threat to global security. The third quote I have there goes like this. It is by a Bangladeshi ambassador who was at the UN in 2000. He says, "Concerns have been voiced that the United Nations peacekeeping was dysfunctional because the troops that the United Nations deployed, troops mostly from the developing countries, were often ill-equipped, ill-trained, and ill-prepared. If developing countries," he added, "would stop responding to the frantic calls of the United Nations today, there will be no peacekeeping tomorrow, barring a few choicest areas in the world of strategic interest to major powers. Blaming the failure of the peacekeepers was the easy way out of meeting the organization's collective responsibility."